what does it look like when someone's healthy with implants? I think that process is dependent on your body's ability to make nice scar tissue capsule around your breast implant. That's the basis of my patent for this formula, is creating a nice scar tissue capsule. And like with anything in the body, like an overreaction is a negative outcome and an underreaction is a negative outcome. So we're thinking about balance.
Welcome to the Dr. Joy Kong podcast, and today's content is really, really interesting because I have Dr. Kayte Susse here with us, and we're going to talk about the health of women who've had breast implants. So anyhow, if you found this content interesting and you enjoyed listening to this channel, please subscribe to Joy Kong MD YouTube channel, and now we're going to get into it. So Dr. Kayte.
Hi, Dr. Joy. I'm so excited to be here in your beautiful clinic and studio. It's a great, every time I come here, I experience some sort of great healing or fun time.
I'm so glad. And you are a fountain of knowledge, and you're very passionate about what you do, and you actually have come up with this innovative formula to help women. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you think about breast implants. What are the issues, and how you've come to design something to help women who have implants?
Okay, so I started this journey as a person who had breast implants, who was experiencing a tremendous amount of symptoms and negative health symptoms, and was very unclear why. And I went to a lot of different types of doctors. This was many years ago now. And I ended up eventually figuring out that breast implants were a big problem for my body. And then when I ended up removing my implants through the correct type of surgery, en bloc capsulectomy, my breast implants were very sticky to the touch, and they were exhibiting what we call gel bleed, so it's sort of similar to a rupture, except it's not a full-on rupture where the silicone has moved and migrated, but it's bleeding out its contents. And additionally, I had very thin scar tissue capsule, which is the protective collagen scar tissue that your body makes around any device that you put inside of it. I had very tiny paper-thin capsules. So, the likelihood is that the immune system is getting in through those thin capsules and pulling off little pieces of the implant, which is responsible for the gel bleed. Nonetheless, I was, riddled with health symptoms, and I've seen autopsies of women who had severe gel bleed and severe rupture, and we found microsilicone in all the organs of those patients in the autopsies, like in the brain and the organs.
Did they die from the breast implants?
It's unclear, but there's a few case studies that I can send you. They're really interesting.
Okay.
The point is just to see that this microsilicone can move through the whole body, and I have no way of verifying if that's the case in my body, if there's microsilicone in my brain, but if we're thinking about the way we're thinking about toxicity in that way. So early in my career, I was really focused on helping women, first of all, learn about the possibility that breast implants could be the underlying problem in their health crisis or chronic health issues, or even the underlying trigger for an autoimmune disease. And then I started moving into helping women who had explanted but were still experiencing health problems. And then I moved now into this new space of trying to figure out a way to compromise and meet people where they are, because I've met a lot of people who do not want to get rid of their breast implants no matter what I tell them, and a lot of people who are committed to augmenting. So I've started to embrace a new approach to beauty, and I have a kind of whole new perspective on it that is...
You were trying to get everybody to take out their implants?
Mm-hmm. I was. You're like, oh. Yeah, right, exactly.
Right, good luck. So you were being trained in chiropractic school, right? Yes. And then was that when you got the implant?
No, so I had breast implants prior to chiropractic school.
Okay.
I started suffering severe health issues right about 9 months after getting breast implants, and my primary problems were musculoskeletal problems, like severe pain and fatigue in the muscles and joints. So I started researching health programs, and I really thought, I knew nothing about health, and I thought chiropractic school is where you learn everything about muscles and joints, and that's my primary issue, so I'm going to go to that program. And then when I got into the program, I quickly realized that those interventions didn't help my pain at all. Like it made no, and then I was watching people around me with pain getting adjusted and getting acupuncture and learning about muscle patterns, and they were getting out of pain. So it was really confusing. And luckily within my program, there are a lot of people doing functional medicine and training people on basically internal medicine. There's a program within chiropractic called chiropractic internist, which is basically internal medicine study and learning about the metabolic causes of pain. And I started learning that there's many different pathways for pain related to blood sugar and diabetes and inflammation and gut health and, parasitic infections and, more things that are not coming to mind right now. And then, lo and behold, of course, like the exposure to toxic chemicals like mercury and how mercury affects the nervous system and the nerves that come out of the brain and the spinal cord. So over time studying the biochemistry of toxicokinetics and understanding the ingredients in pharmaceutical grade silicone that include, mercury and lead and arsenic and platinum and aluminum and other a lot of chemicals. So
yeah. Are these chemicals contained in the silicone or silicone is completely different set of chemicals?
Yeah, no, those are all contained in the silicone. So
why would they put those chemicals in the silicone?
Right, it's a good question. So the best answer I could say is because in the 90s, we had a lot of problems with silicone being migratory. And in my naive understanding of silicone in the early days, I thought silicone was similar to silica, which is similar to sand. And I thought it was like a natural thing. And that's probably, that's why this medical device is made out of that, because it's natural, right? Because that's we just assume that they would think that way. But really, I think what was happening was there was a big problem in the 90s with silicone breaking apart, and it would, move down the rib cage. And so there was a huge lawsuit that Dow Corning, which was the manufacturer of silicone, lost the lawsuit, and there was a lot of money paid out to women, and the FDA pulled silicone-filled implants from the market in 92, I believe it was 92. And after a couple decades, two companies did reformulation of their implants, and their primary thing was to show cohesiveness. So they showed the FDA and even consumers, like, look, you can run this implant over with a car and it won't break apart, because in their perspective, that was all that mattered, was the cohesiveness. So I think that created the need for more chemicals in the formulation, and
I see. Without tinkering with it.
Yeah, I don't think they're rupturing like they used to, but I know they're not rupturing like they used to, but now we're seeing kind of a rise of other types of issues. And it parallels with our world becoming more toxic, right? So we're seeing more pollution and more gene degradation through the generations, right? As being children born of parents exposed to chemicals, and so it's not really good.
So nowadays, breast implants has been a highly, a popular procedure. And what's the approximate number per year of women actually undergoing the procedure?
So the amount has gone down in the last few years, but the trend in silicone over 20 years is very rising. I think 30% over. Don't quote me on that, but roughly 350 to 500,000 women get breast implants in the United States per year. And that does not include other types of silicone devices like butt implants and chin and jaw and
I see.
Pec and penile, that's a thing.
Oh boy. So the product you designed really is helping all these implants, right?
Yeah, I hope that anyone who has a silicone device in their body will consider this formula. It's an augment to silicone devices, but my primary focus is breast implants, because that's what, that was my foundation story. And also, I think it's the most popular cosmetic surgery as far as silicone devices.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of how many women that got silicone implant, breast implant, actually have had issues?
Well, I can tell you that there are, in recent years, there have been releases of suppressed complaints and reports that were given to companies and the FDA. There had been some suppression, and there was a whistleblower, and there's now archives of these just tons and tons and tons of reports and complaints that were kind of not acknowledged. But the FDA has done a really good job. In the fall of last year, they issued new informed consent for surgeons that is alerting them, women people who got implants, about the safety concerns so that they can consent to them up front. This has been because women who are not really being counted are coming forward, like vocally on social media and through advocacy groups, because we don't really have a system in place to track systemic health concerns, because for decades the medical community has been suppressing the idea that that's even, and they're still suppressing the idea that that's even possible. So if they're denying that something is possible, there's no system to track it, which is a big problem, right?
Right.
And the safety studies were never finished. So the companies that presented to the FDA in 2005 or 6 and got their approval, the FDA asked them to finish these studies. They were supposed to be 10-year studies. They were 3-year studies, so they had started. And they were supposed to follow the FDA study design, which had been a big failure in the 90s. It wasn't followed, so the FDA was really trying, I believe. But there was not any follow-up, and so the studies were not finished. And now I think that they've been asked to finish, so I'm hoping that that happens.
Okay. Yeah. So what are the range, was the range of symptoms that you have studied and found that people, maybe a lot of people are experiencing symptoms. They have no idea it might be related to the implant.
Absolutely. So it's a really complex question to answer, because in essence, we're talking about a person's body's response to basically a negative epigenetic environment. So, and I think, you can relate, because you're like one of the healthiest, your lifestyle is one of the cleanest of anyone I know. Like, you don't drink alcohol, you're doing stem cells regularly. Really? Did you start a little bit
just
here and there?
For the mental health aspect,
okay.
Right? But, community.
But you could talk, and I'm sure you have talked about this, when someone is participating in negative habits, it can change the way their genes are expressing themselves, and sometimes a disease process that wouldn't manifest for later in life can manifest earlier. So when you have kind of this clouded internal environment that's caused by an onslaught of toxins 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and your body is not getting a break, it's sort of like up to your own body what it's going to look like, how it's going to manifest. And so that could be a little confusing for a clinician to understand, right? Clinicians looking at a patient and seeing, okay, well, you have a family history of XYZ, and you're manifesting, you're kind of young to be manifesting this.
Okay.
But I can say across the board there are commonalities. Like, we're looking at cases of fibromyalgia in the absence of joint, like an obvious joint connective tissue autoimmunity. Like, they look for those markers and don't find it, yet the patient has fibromyalgia. So it's sort of like, well, what's the cause, right? Things like an auto joint and other types of autoimmunity. Anytime a foreign object is put in the body, it can be a trigger event for an autoimmune process, right? So we're also thinking about swelling and brain fog, which is related to gut health, which goes back to the liver and the pathways and the ability to kind of detox these things out. In my case, I had a lot of just pain, and I personally feel that when people have pre-existing heavy metal toxicity, which may or may not be causing symptoms, but then they put in another thing like breast implants that can be another toxic burden on what's an already burdened system. I think that that's when things can really start to manifest, like in the true nature of that initial heavy metal. Like in the case of mercury, it's like a central nervous system attacker, so it can look like hyperreflexia, it can look like MS in the absence of finding MS, things like that.
So you had pretty drastic reaction to the implant, right?
Yes.
So it's possible a lot of women may have mild symptoms and they can't attribute to that. But have you seen other drastic cases?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've seen like an entire spectrum of response, and I've seen everything from like people who are completely bedbound that are look like a chronic fatigue syndrome patient, and people who were like thought that they felt great and just removed their implants because they heard they had chemicals, and then experienced like a massive kind of like inflammatory de-inflammatory process where they just looked way better than they did before, like aesthetically, and looked thinner. And like one of my close friends actually ended up explaining because of what I went through, and then she just lost a lot of weight, and she thought it was like weight she had from having a baby, and thought it was just like, oh, this is baby weight. And then as soon as she explanted, she just like now it's interesting because we're segueing into like, what does it look like when someone's healthy with implants, and do you have to if you have implants, you know, do you
Right.
have to have symptoms even
That
if you're
was my
aware or
next
not aware?
question. Yeah.
Right. And I get it, right? So, you know, I think that the answer is that there is a possibility that you can be healthy with breast implants. I think that that process is dependent on your body's ability to make nice scar tissue capsule around your breast implant. That's the basis of my patent for this formula, is creating a nice scar tissue capsule. In plastic surgery, they talk a lot about the antithesis of a good outcome is that capsular contracture, where it's like too thick and hard and it pulls and that's like what they really worry about.
Right.
And like with anything in the body, like an overreaction is a negative outcome and an underreaction is a negative outcome. So we're thinking about balance.
I see. I've definitely seen women with contractures and it's not pretty, and they have to go back under the knife to correct that.
Right.
So you're saying that the formula you've designed is possible to prevent the over encapsulation or connective tissue formation and under.
So I would say that this formula supports a healthy scar tissue formation, which includes balance. So preventing is the role of a drug, right? So
treading on,
but yes,
cautiously.
But you know, as a physician that recommends this formula, you can talk about the the chemistry of like what these ingredients do in the research. I don't really have that luxury as a vendor, but I can educate doctors, and you know. So
yeah. So how long ago did you start to work on this formula?
Yeah. So I say my R&D cycle is 6 years because I go back to like my first day of being sick. But you know, really about a year for developing the formula, and I just launched it a couple months ago. And yeah, we're essentially a startup, but it is for sale online, and I hope to one day have it in surgeons' offices so that they can, you know, recommend it to all of their patients that get implants, so that, you know, they can support them well through that process and sort of enhance the patient's experience with silicone devices.
I see. So how many ingredients are in your formula?
You know, I don't know how many. I've never counted them. I have a bunch of spreadsheets at home because I kept taking things off and putting things on, and then I would be like, oh, I'm going to add this in to support the cofactor of this ingredient. But basically there's three blends. Like one is a collagen blend. So the intention is to support that capsule formation. It does it in a unique way. It's actually supporting the process in which our body, when it secretes histamine, can break down collagen. So it's sort of supporting the histamine pathway to prevent the breakdown of excess collagen.
Okay.
And
so that supports the capsule, the integrity.
Exactly. And another great side effect of supporting the collagen pathway is that it can be, in a way, like a beauty supplement. So a lot of people who've taken it have called me and said that they feel like their skin looks tighter, that they are seeing cosmetic beauty effects. If they have flushing as an issue, which is can be a consequence of excess histamine, they're seeing a dampening of that redness, which is kind of cool. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in the gut related to histamine, so it's not uncommon to experience gut change, positive gut motility changes. None of those are in my claims, although I might down the line look into trying to figure out if I can structure claims like that. It's just claims are complicated.
So that's just from helping the connective tissue?
It's from working on histamine, basically. It's from supporting the MMP9 pathway.
I see.
So that's one sleeve. The other sleeve is supporting detox. So this is in no way a product that is pushing detox or enhancing conjugation. Like you might see detox formulas on the market, like milk thistle and things like that. It's nothing like that at all. It's more just if there's common genetic mutations, like on B12 and B9, I've included the active form of those B vitamins so that, they're kind of like the quarterback of detox. So if you're not converting, and about 75% of the population have mutations on those enzymes that convert B12. So you consume it, but it doesn't ever make it into methylcobalamin, right? Or methylmalonic acid. And we just have compromised abilities. So I added the the downstream form. And then I also included things like calcium D-glucarate, which helps to prevent. So when you have exposure to xenoestrogens or chemicals in the environment that act like estrogen, which is a negative outcome that can lead to all sorts of things like breast cancer and estrogen dominance. And so, people with chronicity, they tend to have this gut dysbiosis where they end up with excess of beta-glucuronidase, which is the enzyme that your liver goes through all this work to wrap up those bad estrogens, puts them into bile to eliminate, and then the enzymes in the gut then just unwrap them and put them back in the bloodstream. So we don't want that. So I put calcium D-glucarate, which helps to support dampening beta-glucuronidase, so we can eliminate those xenoestrogen chemicals.
So what do the xenoestrogens do when it's related to breast implant?
Yeah, so whether you're getting toxins from the environment or outside of you or from the internal environment, by having devices, you're going to need to be able to support the elimination of xenoestrogens. Xenoestrogens act like estrogen, and they can cause imbalance in your entire hormone pathway, right? So, and I'm sure you could speak to estrogen dominance and why that's not ideal, but most people know a little bit. Nowadays, that's like a common thing, right? Estrogen dominance, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so
it helps balance the body in general, but does that do anything specifically for the breast implants?
So what it's doing is, let's say that your body, you have the silicone devices in your body, and your immune system is pulling off tiny pieces of silicone, and mobilizing them. They're going to go to the liver so that they can be eliminated. And if you have flora imbalance such that beta-glucuronidase is prevalent, which is very common, you're going to unwrap those. You're going to have the potential to unwrap those xenoestrogens and put them back into circulation. So it's like a big vicious cycle. Mm-hmm. So when we look at diseases long-term like breast cancer, and we look at the role of xenoestrogen chemicals in breast cancer, we see there's studies showing calcium D-glucarate in conjunction with vitamin A is helping in the prevention of that particular type of cancer. So that's just a relationship. I'm in no way relating my formula to cancer, but but that's one example of how chemicals can be dampened, right? So we can help. So when you add calcium D-glucarate and vitamin A together, they're going to prevent the unwrapping of chemical estrogen, so they can be eliminated.
Okay.
It's a roundup. Sorry, it was a long-winded explanation. Let me drink some tea.
Yeah. So you said there are three main blends, right?
There's one more that we haven't.
Yeah.
So the third is supporting the immune system. So going back to the early days when we're looking at autoimmunity related to silicone devices, even though this is still for the life of me don't understand how people can still say that it's not an obvious relationship, but there's still people who say that a lifestyle autoimmune disease is not necessarily attributed to a trigger like silicone or a foreign device, but in my clinical opinion, it's an obvious relationship that it can turn on an autoimmune process. But there's things that we know about autoimmunity that people who are missing certain key nutrients in their diet, or because they're not absorbing it, they're more likely to have a dysregulated immune system that's going to lead to turning on an autoimmune process. So we look at the T regulatory system and the glutathione system and its relationship to basically saying yes or no when the body presents self-tissue as antigen. So when the body is saying hey, this little piece of your joint, we think it's a bad thing that should be attacked. And then if the T cells are agreeing, and the T regulatory cells, which are policing the T helper cells, if they're not really fostered by glutamine and vitamin C and the substrates that recycle glutathione, right? If that system is not nourished, then the body is going to be more likely to agree and say that is a pathogen, attack it. And the next thing you know, you're attacking your body, right? So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had all of those raw materials, and that's what the immune sleeve looks like.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've heard some stories of what people how they did after they took your product.
Yeah, so we're collecting that data now, and I've had great feedback, and I look forward to having more formal questionnaires in the future that can really show the benefit outside of just like me raving about it and saying everyone says it's great, but
well, we've heard from our office manager.
Yeah.
She had some kind of a histamine reaction, redness of skin, and that really helped calm that down.
So she's an example of someone who doesn't have silicone devices, but when I was talking to her about what the formula did, she resonated with a lot of the things. So again, we're talking about exposures to chemicals, which a lot of people are getting, right? Whether they have silicone devices in their body or they're getting it from the LA air or the myriad of places that we can get exposed now, right? Which I think would be a good segue into talking about my favorite topic, which is regeneration, right?
Yes.
After exposures, because we're talking about, supporting the body, but what happens when you need more than support? What happens when you need to regenerate? And that's where you come in.
Yeah, so you have come to our clinic for some regeneration.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about, stem cells and exosomes, to help you, I guess, achieve a better state?
Yeah, so I was really just blown away. Like the first time we did stem cells, I had no idea that they were going to be so powerful, and I was, to be honest, skeptical. And I think even when I interviewed you in 2019 or 20, no, it was 20, I think, I was reverberating some of the kind of criticisms I'd heard about stem cell therapy, and you were talking about those things really articulately. And I was, I had heard things and listened to podcasts and heard about the bad players, right? And so when we finally came around, and, to be honest, like stem cell therapy is expensive. So when people go out on a limb to pay for an expensive therapy and then they're like not sure, right? That's hard to mitigate. So every time I talk about your work, I'm always saying like her supply chain, it's on like completely managed. Like you have everything from like the infancy in the lab, and like you're just completely in control of the process with that like integrity and, understanding of the quality. So that's so great, right?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the regenerative medicine field, I think, a lot of people, the public may not know because there's so much money involved. So every actor is coming in. It's like a fly, they all want a piece. And so many of the people who are in the field are really paying attention to the profit. That's number one above anything else. And the efficacy and the science comes way below. So whatever people can do to maximize the profit, that's what they were doing. And then when I discovered that's what's going on, that's when I decided, okay, I have to be on the business side of this so that I can, really have control of the quality of the product.
And set a standard.
Right, and also use the science. And because, there are all this research that's been going around all around the world. And why can't we take, pieces of what we know that really work and put them all together? So that's kind of what I did. So the supporting the immune system, reducing the autoimmune reactions, and even helping tissue heal, even breaking down excess scar tissue, right? And then building new healthy tissue. So that's all part of what the mesenchymal stem cells can do.
Right, and I think one of the stories you told me before I did stem cells that helped me feel so confident and excited was you talked about your liver cirrhosis patient who experienced like this tremendous like liver recovery after one infusion, right? And I don't know how many cc's it was. Was it a lot? Or?
2 cc's.
Really?
It was not very much. He's not a big guy, but it was a very low amount. And my protocol at the time was that he was supposed to come back in 2 weeks to get the second one, and he just never showed up. And I didn't know what happened to him until a couple months later. His brother, who paid for the treatment, told me that he is completely normal, running around like a normal person, and then got his lab tested, and his liver was normal. This is somebody that was in hospice, so he was in deathbed, really.
Wow.
So to me, that was miraculous, and it doesn't happen every day, but when it happens, that really gives you a sense of the power of these cells.
Absolutely. And so when I was thinking about the application for myself as someone with chronic toxicity, and that's like a common thing among breast implant illness patients, I know that you could regenerate me back to being like a fetus, and I would still be sick if I was toxic, right? Toxicity is still I could be a 10-year-old, and if I have this high exposure to toxic chemicals, I'm still going to be dealing with those things. Like stem cells do not in themselves detox your body. However, I know personally that my organs of detox have suffered over the years. You know, they've been trying to move this stuff out, and you know, they have aged in that process. So rejuvenating my liver is going to make that a better liver to continue to eliminate. And I think that's exactly what I saw. Like, I saw an increase in vitality and an increase in a youth feeling and energy, and then that was sort of followed by, unfortunately or fortunately, like another kind of onslaught of detox. So it's almost like the body is like, great, you can handle even more, like we're going to mobilize even more added tissue. And this is the story of my life. Like, I'll have a really great day followed by a really bad, you know, that's just how it happens, right? It's just, our bodies are really smart and they know what you can handle. But yeah, so I'm excited to work more with stem cells. I'm glad I, you know, did it later in the process after detoxing more, and like, it's a huge tool. Like, I think it's like a cornerstone tool.
Yeah, I call it the engine for the body. So the body is like a vehicle, a car, and you need really pristine, good, high-powered engine to get you to where you want to go. But, you know, a lot of people are putting everything they could, you know, all the vitamins, all the, you know, minerals and all, you know, light therapy. But if the engine is barely going, right, it's running down. Because as we get older, the number of stem cells and their potency have decreased drastically. So then the engine is, you know, is not really keeping up. So if you want this to be a powerful Ferrari and to really take you, you know, places and, you know, with high speed and for a long time, then you need to upgrade your engine. So I think that's what's missing in a lot of the functional medicine, you know, until stem cells came along, because it can revamp your engine. So there are a lot of things we can do which are all important, and I'm a big fan of all these biohacking you know, methods. But you've got to address the engine and the fuel. So everything else we're doing, I feel like, are the fuel to help the engine to function better.
And like, could you speak a little bit about the senescent cells and stem cells and how they interact? And
well, the senescent cells, so as we get older, you know, we accumulate these old cells that are just not functioning very well. So stem cells actually, they are able to detect. So not only they boost your immune system, which will help you,
like the NK cells, that will kill the senescent.
Exactly, will help you get rid of senescent cells. But if a cell is not functioning well and they're too old, the stem cells have a way of detecting this is a cell that doesn't belong. So just like pre-cancer cells, so they can detect cells that are not functioning optimally, and they're able to send signals to send these cells onto a death path, and then they can be gone, and then the new cells can come along, because as long as they're occupying the physical space and they're not doing their job, there's a Chinese saying that's really funny. I'm not going to say it.
Say it.
They said you're sitting on the toilet, but you're not, you know, you're not producing anything.
There's an American saying like
really?
that too. Yeah. I'm not going to say it. It's very vulgar, but people probably know.
Right. So these senescent cells are like those, you know, folks that are just sitting on this spot that's not doing anything. You got to get rid of them so your body can regenerate, you know.
And they're not, it's not that they're not even doing anything. I think they're actually communicating bad messages.
That's true.
So they're kind of
like
sending
out toxic signals.
Yeah, so they're kind of throwing a wrench in the telephone game that's being played as the cells are being born and trying to live to their full potential, and they're giving them kind of a bad blueprint, right?
Exactly. That's the danger of the senescent
And that's
cells.
aging. That's what aging is. That's why we don't look the way we looked, you know, years before.
Yeah.
Some of us. Well, you do, but some of us.
Well, you look fantastic.
Better than when we met, right? Do you think? I think I can see it. You don't have to say that, but I think stem cells really made a difference. Although I'm ready for more, but my budget is not ready. But my body wants more. But you know, we're trialing, airing different things to see like what does exosomes do in isolation. I actually found them to be. I felt so fatigued after doing solo exosomes, and you know, so many factors to say. But I think that viruses play a role in that, and like you were talking about the NK cell immune system relationship, and it's very variable, right? The response that people can. Oh, I wanted you to talk about other BII patients, because I think people who are listening might be, because people have asked me about stem cells and BII specifically, and I've given...
the breast implant. I can't really say I've treated people with the, you know, I can't say that's breast implant, you know, produced problems. I mean, I I've helped people who, before they were doing surgery, these are actually fat transfers. They were going to transfer fat to the breast because that's another method, right? They think it's more natural, but a lot of times the newly transferred fat don't really survive. So
like the necrosis, or just
they've been changed from one place to another, and you'd be lucky if a third of them are still there. By the time it's a month or two down the line. So I was giving patients stem cell pre-treatment, so to give their body enough of these regenerative potential, and that really enhanced the retention of these cells after they got the fat transplant.
So was that an infusion and an IV, or you were doing local injections of stem cells?
No, I was just doing an infusion.
Oh, wow.
Because I do believe that you want the cells to talk to your immune system, and that's one of the most pivotal power of these cells, is that they are asking your immune system to come and participate, to help with removal of the bad cells and regenerating new cells.
And so, with my understanding of the way like an injury in the immune system works, I would imagine if you just had a surgery in this area, it's almost like telling the immune system like to hyper focus on that area. So if they're going in anyway, they might just be like pulling that fat out too, thinking it's inappropriate. And so I could see how that would, dampening that with stem cells, which are really anti-inflammatory, could lead to kind of like a more balanced integration of that fat, right? So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, the survival of the cells, the new cells, it requires certain nurturing environment, so more regenerative environment. Without that, they probably would just wither. It's like, I don't belong here. You just suck me out of my, my thigh, and then now I'm in the breast. So why should, they got traumatized, and then they go on to die. And stem cells, one of the benefits or function of mesenchymal stem cells is anti-apoptotic property, which means if the cells are damaged, they think they should die, they are able to send signals to prevent that programmed cell death pathway. So it really, kind of halts them on their path to die. So then you're retaining more live tissue.
So how does that work? That's really interesting. I haven't heard that particular point. So how does that work in relation to like the apoptosis that you want to happen with senescent cells? Like
that's completely different pathway. I mean, that's the magic of stem cells, and that's something that, why I'm always in awe, when I treat patients, because the cells know. When it's cancer cells, when the cells don't belong, there's something really wrong with the cells, these mesenchymal stem cells are able to send signals to trigger them onto apoptotic pathway. They secrete what's called trail ligand. So that actually kind of lights up that pathway, so then they go down and die. But when the cells are semi-damaged, but really could be salvaged, like let's say you got a burn, or some kind of mechanical damage, some kind of radiation damage, or even ischemia in stroke victims, the area that got damaged, they die, severe damage. But then they would leak out all these calcium, all these signals, and the neighboring cells would also all of a sudden decide, okay, I think, it's time for me to die.
Oh, wow.
But in those cases, the mesenchymal stem cells are able to say, no, you don't have to die. You don't qualify.
Interesting.
So, and then they are able to save these neighboring cells, so you don't have to have massive lesions.
Right. Isn't it so interesting? And I know you have a background in psychology, or psychiatry rather, one of your diplomates. I think it's so phenomenally interesting how on the local cellular level we see these parallels to just our social interaction in life, right? Right?
Yeah, intelligence. And that's what I call, so that's true, the bigger universe and the little universe, we are, literally a universe. Yeah. We're walking around with all these, what 90% of our genetic material are, microbes, right? So we're this walking universe. So when the cells, when they are senescent, and when they get older, they lose certain intelligence, and that happens to stem cells as well. So I coined the term cellular dementia. So these cells, your stem cells are getting demented, because when you put fat-derived stem cells, which is from an adult person, 40, 50 years old, years of age, they have lost some of the intelligence that were still contained in the early cells, comparing to when the baby is really young, or in the birth tissue, which is way younger than the baby's stem cells. When you use those really early cells and you put them next to cancer cells, they've done this in research studies, the birth tissue derived MSCs next to this brain cancer cell, glioblastoma, they're able to kill off the cancer cells, make them shrink and go away. But if you got fat-derived MSCs and put them next to these cancer cells, it helped them grow. They just get bigger and bigger.
No way.
So that's the cellular dementia.
So you're saying, so this, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I just got excited. I got so excited. So finish.
It is exciting, yes.
I wanted to know, because I've heard that in the people who criticize stem cells, that they say they can drive cancer. And so, yeah.
Well, because, watch my YouTube video.
Yeah.
Are all MSCs created equal?
I think I've seen that one.
Yeah, they're not, because stem cells from a birth tissue, which is kind of in between the stem cells from the newborn baby and the embryonic stem cell, they're kind of sitting in the middle because they got surface receptors that are very similar to embryonic stem cells that you just don't find in the stem cells in the baby anymore. So they're kind of in between because they got sequestered and they got cornered off in very early in the embryogenesis process.
Okay.
So these young cells have all this powerful intelligence that have gradually been lost as we get older and older. So it just, it's...
So when people are trying to decide what type of stem cell infusion they need for their health, you're saying the older the patient is, if they're thinking about an adipose or even a bone marrow, which I would never do, but I know people do that, right?
Yeah.
You're saying maybe think more about getting...
Yeah. Well, I'm a big proponent of birth tissue-derived stem cells because my mission is to give people the most powerful form of therapy, right? The most beneficial results, and then the least chance of problems, of harm. So the best, if you watch that lecture, it gives you all this research studies looking at the evidence of the potency between these different cell types and the safety.
Right.
So there's really no equivalence that, there's no confusion that these birth tissue derived stem cells are more potent and more powerful and are safer. So I wouldn't do it on myself, and I don't want to do it for a patient, especially, and I think if a person's over the age 50, 55, I really think they're just way better off if they just use a birth tissue derived stem cells.
Got it. Okay.
And besides, you may be using this for more of, helping with your health and the condition that you're dealing with, but I'm sure part of it is also you using it for anti-aging purposes.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. Well, because I feel like toxicity took away a lot of my youth and aged me more than. Well, I know I have an aging gene, an SOD2 gene.
I see.
So I want to get it totally downregulated, but when it was really active there's no way to know for sure that was happening, but that was my perception.
It's almost impossible to do anti-aging treatments using your own. So how many times can you take your own bone marrow or fat out and then reinfuse? Every time you take something out and you put it back, those things will make its effect known, and then they will die. So it's not like just because it's yours, it's going to stay. Once you activate certain cells, they are going to live a defined lifetime. So which means that you take your cells out and you put back in the body, they go to work and they die, and you have just depleted your own stem cell supply.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Really? So you're saying even though I am a self-regenerating organism,
you have only so many generations you can regenerate. That's why you run out of stem cells as you get older.
Wow. So is there any way to measure your level of stem cells, or can you look at correlations of telomeres, or what type of, do you have any metrics?
Well, I think the statistic, and people have done the research study and looking at the percentage of MSCs in relationship to total number of cells. When you were born, every 10,000 cells is a mesenchymal stem cells.
Okay.
And when you reach your teenage years, becomes 1 in 100,000. So
wow.
That's tenfold less. When you reach your 40s, is 1 in 400,000. When you reach your 80s, is 1 in 2 million. So that is the trend of the human species, when it comes to stem cells.
And are there other cell types that follow this? Like, do immune cells follow this as well? Because I'm thinking, of course, about...
I think it's probably going to be very similar.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the NK cell transplants. Of course, my brain is really like tunnel vision on NK right now. I'm just obsessed with that research, but I'm thinking about that as well. So taking them out, but you're taking only a little bit, and then you're cloning them. So we're going on a side topic of what we're talking about, but I just...
Yeah, so I think there's some research have shown benefits, right, NK cells, and how they give aging mice, that's a progeria model mice that they have premature aging.
Right.
It's because they're, NK cell, the pathway, they have defects, so they could not kill off old cells. So just like young kids, young babies, they are getting old cells too, right? They constantly are, their cells are getting defective or getting older, and then their body's so regenerative, they just replace it. So that's why they maintain, they're so plump and so, beautiful.
And resilient.
But then when you get older, we're losing that capacity, but these kids, they lose their capacity way younger.
Right.
So then when they give them stem cells, these mice, they give them stem cells, all of a sudden they look like young mice.
Right.
Because they just got rid of the bad cells.
So I'm just still looping on the idea that when I take out stem cells from fat, so I think about that's like a huge aging that you're giving yourself, because my brain, I'm thinking about plastic surgery, I immediately go to BBL, right? BBL is like this big trend in plastic surgery now, where they're moving the fat around, taking it from the stomach and putting it in the butt.
Okay, and
then, regular liposuction, right? So by that logic, is regular liposuction an aging procedure if you're removing quite a bit of your stem cell capacity?
That's a good question. So what happens when they do liposuction and they're getting the stem cells is really not stem cells from the fat. The fat is the fat. They're getting the stem cells that are huddling around the blood vessels.
Okay.
So all the fat are still supplied by the blood. And then they're really getting the stem cells from the blood vessels that are in the fat. So in that sense, yes, you're reducing the amount of tissue, the number of, the amount of blood vessels and the cells that are around it. So yes, you are reducing the number of stem cells, the total number of stem cells.
So, and then this is going to sound like a stupid question. So if you're someone who loses a lot of fat metabolically,
you don't necessarily lose your blood vessels.
Because you're keeping the blood, I answered it, but I was talking it out because it's interesting, right? I mean, our fat, our fat. All right.
Yeah, our fat are important, but, it's, because they blew up, that's what we don't want. We want them to shrink to a little fat cell.
So would you say, this is a way out of left field, but I'm just thinking about the concept of removing from the body and then how it affects aging. So when we think about blood donation and anything where we take blood out and the triggering of the mobilization of growth factors and immune cells from the bone, would you consider that to be an aging activity?
Well, there are only so many generations that you have. There's so many stem cells and they only have so many generations. So once you activate them, then you're activating means you're making them divide, right? So the more you divide, the less you have, less to divide. Because there's the Hayflick principle. There's only so many generations you can divide. So once you reach that number, then you can't divide anymore. But so yes, then you're triggering that division.
Okay.
Then you probably have less generations left.
That's so interesting. So like previously, I would have thought of that as like a youth. Your blood dip, you're getting all that you can, especially when you put the plasma back in, that's like a regenerative process. But I didn't really think about the compromise of creating extra division and but I learned thinking about how new infections age the immune system and it's the same concept, right? So it does make sense.
Yeah, I mean I know there different hacks. They're people are selling different machines.
PRP, right?
Right.
So you're doing that. You're taking it out to put it back.
Well, that's not stem cells. So that's just the platelets. So.
But it's moving immune cells out. Was the point of the marrow, because you're taking blood out. Okay.
Not very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel better now.
So they're
taking
they're kind of more mature cells, and then you putting back platelets. That's end stage cells. But I don't know how much you're really invoking the bone marrow. But I think the bottom line is there's only so much there's so much potential your body has. That's why from our entire human history, the richest, the most powerful kings and queens, they all end up getting older and die, because that just, no matter what you have, even if now you have some technology, there's still this, the Hayflick principle. I mean, there's just only so many generations you have left. And we know no matter how good you take care of yourself, your stem cell supply is going downhill like this. This is why it's so revolutionary that now we can infuse these declining supply and return the body to a younger state. And it's not only that, in theory it sounds good, but also in experimental models, when they look at mice who they have given stem cells, and then dissecting, looking at their muscles and their brain, and looking at the growth factor levels, looking at all kinds of inflammation markers and the neurotransmitter levels, everything has reverted to the younger state. And that's how powerful the new signals are.
So by that logic, especially someone like you who's doing regular infusions, right? Are you also regenerating the stem cell evolution, like of the innate stem cells? Like if so, you're going back, right? That's the catch-22 that I think about a lot. Is it something that's keep maintaining you where you are? I mean, I know we look younger, but if it can't, right? So I'm being devil's advocate here, but you understand.
My own stem cell supply probably are still going down, but because I got new infusions and they were able to replace, to exert the benefits of what my own stem cells cannot do.
Right.
All of a sudden, I'm brought back in my, in
your
my
markers
age.
And what you look like.
Yeah.
Right. But in theory, is it actually adding longevity to your lifespan?
Well, at least in animal models, it has been pretty consistent that when you give some, an animal, middle-aged animal, regular stem cell treatments, it extends their lifespan by about 30%.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent.
Wow.
So that's, been verified. And even if you give somebody stem cell infusion when they're 75, well, human equivalent age of 75, if you give them stem cells, these mice, if you give them stem cells versus not giving them, the mice that got stem cells at age 75 are living 3 times as long from the time of infusion to death, compared to the one that did not get. And then they also they look a lot younger.
Yeah.
Their mobility's great,
yeah.
and their cognition's good. So it's been proven in animal models that it improves longevity and the health span.
Amazing. And I have a colleague who recently did like a really high, it was like 4 cc's of stem cells on her grandmother who in her 80s who just had a stroke, and she just threw everything she had in her arsenal, and this woman was walking within like a couple of weeks of the stroke after being completely immobilized in her 80s, and you could just see like her face was brighter, and of course she was very tired after that amount of cells infused. I mean, she was resting for quite a while, but when she finally came back, it was almost a miracle, especially at that age, to see that type of it's pretty cool. Yeah, because
it gave her body all the signals that she has not been receiving probably for a couple of decades. So
it's phenomenal. It makes me want to like cry. It makes me emotional just thinking about the potential, and
it's powerful. Yeah.
And then of course it always goes to accessibility. Like, how do we get this to be a more accessible treatment? Because
I do wonder, because right now it's given as a tissue transplant, so it's still even though people think it's expensive, it's still fairly affordable, because if you look at gene editing,
right.
I mean, you've seen the price tag, $750,000. I mean, it's absolutely insane. So there's part of me that I'm wondering. Okay, so I'm thinking maybe when FDA approves stem cell therapy as a treatment, that would drive the price down because insurance companies are going to cover it. But then I realized, then it's going to be under the control of these drug companies who have gotten FDA approval. They could put the price way up, and then it could really be chaotic. So I don't know which direction it's going to go.
That's an interesting point. I didn't think about how that could be a problem.
Monopoly.
For accessibility.
That's what I'm afraid of it. Yeah,
that's a really interesting
So right now,
point.
stem cells, because we use unmanipulated stem cells, so they are considered tissue transplants. So it's from one person, nothing's changed. You don't use enzymes, you don't grow them, and then you put in another person's body. So it's not that different from just blood transfusion or organ transplantation. So, but if you start to manipulate and then and you don't count them as just tissue transplant, then there could be patents.
Yeah, it reminds me of the hydrofacial. I was just talking with my esthetician about the hydrofacial. It's a great facial, but they have this proprietary solution that you can't do a hydrofacial without the solution. Yeah. And they price fixed it. So you know, that's why hydrofacials are like $300, even though they could be like $80. And it's because of the solution, and it is a pharma conspiracy. No, it's a business. Yeah. I get it, but
it's concerning. So anyhow, but we have to stop here because even though this is such an incredible conversation,
it was great.
But Dr. Kayte, you have to come back and we'll do this again because it's just super fun. So I hope you enjoyed listening to our chat and find this really interesting and maybe getting some tips for your own health. So if you really like this, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Joycom MD. And then I want to thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
And thank you for making this great product. Dr. Kayte's. So if you're
Silicone
interested.
support formula.
Okay, where can they get this?
At drkates.com.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you everybody.